if you have time left, but maybe I should skip the next one, and then Tommaso, you could ask your one instead.
Yeah, sounds good.
Also, you've been very quiet.
Yeah, we had I'm going to say my question now, the question I've had. So I was coming into this interview thinking that you still supported a two-state solution, which I think you viewed as the only realistic outcome that could be achieved within current political conditions. So I was quite surprised when you said at the beginning that
Tommaso,
you don't.
I don't want to. I don't want to be pedantic about it, but I think language is important. I never supported anything. I remain what I was when I was your age. I remain a communist. And part of being a communist is leaving the world without borders. The question is not what I support or what I believe. It's what's politically feasible at a particular moment in time, given the distribution of power, what's feasible and what advances a cause in the sense of leading to a desirable future. And I didn't think one state had any political support. I looked for it. I didn't see any political support for it. I looked in the International Court of Justice. I looked in human rights organizations. I looked in statements by governments in the UN. I looked at popular public opinion. Was there any support for dismantling the state of Israel? I didn't see any. Was there any support, even in left parties? Take the case of the UK. What was Corbyn's position? He was the leftmost political figure in a party which had political clout. Excuse me. What was his position? It was two states. So
I think
there was never any support for it. And so there was, is politics about posing in front of the camera? Everybody wants to look like Che Guevara? Or is politics about trying to improve the lives of people, trying to make the world a better place? And I was committed to the second, not the first. I went through my vainglorious posing for the camera Che Guevara period. Now, most people went from Che Guevara to Citibank. They became bankers or lawyers. I did not. I realized the errors of my youth, but I stayed true to my convictions. However, I realized that to make the world a better place, you have to take into account where the world is at. You can't impose your reality or your beliefs on the world. You have to see where the world is at and then see what you can change for the better. So I never abandoned my beliefs. I have stood fast by them, but I didn't see any basis for one state. And I still don't see any basis for it. I said I think that probably 10 or 20 years will have to elapse until the dust settles. A new generation, not as cynical, not as jaded, not as defeated as this generation, comes into being. And the normal aspirations for human beings in a modern world is for personal dignity, equality of personhood, and at some point that will translate into a struggle for civil rights. And hopefully Israel will begin to get diminishing returns from its exploitation of the Nazi Holocaust. And a new generation will say, yes, what happened to the Jews was horrible. What happened to the Jews was terrible, but it can't extenuate what they're doing to the Palestinians. The new generation will find the moral confidence to put Israel in its place and to say, you know what, enough is enough with using the Nazi Holocaust as a weapon to deny Palestinians their rights. So far, it hasn't. So far, Israel is still able to effectively exploit the Holocaust card, or effectively play the Holocaust card. But maybe a new generation, because we're already talking about, believe it or not, the war ends in 1945. So we're already talking about 70 years ago. And as I said, another 10 and 20 years pass, it'll be fully a century. And it seems reasonable that Israel won't be able to as effectively play the Holocaust card when it's a century into the past. And then the struggle for civil rights might gain ground, as in South Africa.
I was just reading now a quote from our last interview in 2017, in which you were saying, and I'm quoting you now, the idea of a Jewish state in a post-Holocaust world commands a lot of international legitimacy, which is what you just said now. And I'm wondering if even in 10 or 20 years' time, you think it's realistic to think that the very nature of Israel, which I'm not defending or anything, but the very nature of Israel is that there is a Jewish majority, that could change, or that Israel could accept?
I told you, the questions you sent me were smart. It was clear to me you had done your homework. Those are the critical questions. I agree with you. I would say I was careful in what I said. I said in the post-Holocaust world. Will the Nazi Holocaust loom as large 100 years after it happened? I'm not so sure. As you know, your generation, their historical memory doesn't go back more than around 5 weeks. So will this Nazi Holocaust have the kind of power, ideological power and political power that it exerts now? I can't predict. But what you said is exactly right. In the post-Nazi Holocaust world, the idea of a Jewish state commands legitimacy.
And do you think that alternatively...
I suspect, Tommaso, that you covered that.
Sorry, I missed your last sentence.
Excuse me?
I missed your last sentence. Sorry.
I said I suspect, Tommaso, remember that quote, because I think the argument is strong there. You know, you're dealing with public opinion. How do you choose public opinion? How do you change it? How do you turn it into a political force? And then you have to deal with ideological matters. And Israel had effectively honed the Nazi Holocaust as a effective political weapon. Can't get around that.
And do you think there's any chance that instead of a civil rights struggle in some years' time, there could be maybe a resurgence of the two-state settlement on the table?
No. I think that in order for a movement to succeed, it has to inspire. And two states will not again inspire the Palestinian people. I don't believe it. I think the memories are so negative of what happened, from the high hopes of the First Intifada, and then the Declaration of Statehood in November 1988 to today, when you have a gang of the most wretched, despicable, corrupt, I don't want to call them leaders, just wretches. What was the end of Saab Erekat? His end was he's in Hadassah Hospital in Israel, tweeting Tzipi Livni. Tweeting Tzipi Livni. That's what he's doing. Sending her emails back and forth. Tzipi Livni, who presided over Operation Cast Lead, who went on TV the night after Operation Cast Lead and said, I told the Israeli army to carry on like hooligans, and that's just what they did, and I'm happy. That's who he ends up sending love letters to. What a cause. What a cause. Cheering the Israelis as they're destroying Gaza. Cheering them. Do you know I can't even look at the news anymore from there? It so revolts me. This Hanan Ashrawi, she tweets how the UAE betrayed the Palestinians. Oh, really? The UAE just did what you've been doing since 1993. Who pays your salaries, Ms. Ashrawi? Who pays your salary? Who do you work for? You work for Israel. Israel pays your salary. You do whatever they say. She was the public relations person for the PLO. Look at her tweets during the Gaza Freedom March. Nothing. They were terrified that the Freedom March might succeed. They were praying that Israel would kill enough Palestinians in Gaza. That's what the cause became. And in the Palestinian mind, that's all connected, conflated with the two states. That's what two states got them. So I find it hard to believe that if it reemerges, it's going to reemerge in the form of two states. So just emerge and give us our rights. We don't care whether it's 2 states, 6 states, 20 states. Just give us our rights. We have a right to elect our government. That's our right. You know, basic rights. That's what it'll emerge as.
So you've said in the past that Israel occupation has been so far mostly cost-free, and pressure on Israel could potentially either come from Israeli citizens putting pressure on their government, US citizens putting pressure on the US government, and of course from Palestinians themselves in Gaza and the West Bank. What do you think is the current state of public opinion and consciousness in Israel, the US, and Palestine on the conflict? And what are the prospects for creating the political conditions to pressure Israel in the future in these 3 places?
First of all, I'm no expert on Israel. I never really studied internal Israeli society very much. And I haven't been there since 2004, so we're going 16 years, which is probably about how old you guys are. So it's a long time. And but it's pretty obvious. Everybody will tell you there's no left in Israel. I mean, Israel is an unusual place because it's a alt-right